welcome back to another episode of Soul Focused Radio. This is your host, Martina Tam.
And this is your host, Cindy Edwards.
And your host, Martin Friedman.
Hey, everybody. How are you?
It feels like it's been a minute since all three of us were here, doesn't it?
It has been.
I was just going to say that.
Well, it's good.
Yeah,
it's good to have everybody on.
It is. It's good to hear both your voices and just knowing that a lot of life has happened in the last few weeks, and it's really good to be back on with both of you again. And I'm excited to hear your conversation, the conversation between the two of you on our topic today, which is emotional vulnerability.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to having this conversation and learning more from a wise mother.
I'm trying. This is still all of a learning process for me as well.
I actually have an interesting story that I was thinking about with socialization and parenting. It was actually happened a few weeks ago, but it came to my mind again this week and wanted to share with you all. I don't know if you've experienced this with your families and the children in your families, but I noticed with our daughter Makeba, who's now 10 months old, around when she was like 7 or 8 months old, she would start flipping books on her own. And I realized that she was always flipping with the page on the right going to the left, right? Because that's how we read in English. And so that's how she's been seeing me flip books. And I realized that she was already being socialized because I would try to turn the books, what we would consider the end, and have her flip pages from the left to the right. And it took her, she was pretty resistant. She would flip it back over and want to turn pages from the right to the left. And it took a while for me of intentionally having her switch pages and turn from the left to the right, that she started now turning pages either way. But it really showed me how fast the socialization process happens without even realizing it, right? Because I always read my books that way. So I never even think that there's the possibility to read books the other way. And so it was really interesting and kind of just brought to the forefront a lot of our conversations around socialization and soul focus group and how that impacts us so early on.
Well, I'm going to jump in on this one because this is a topic, that I can really relate to, because at a very young age, I also, learned, and I'm not going to say very well, but when I was younger, I learned to read Hebrew. And, Hebrew, you read right to left instead of left to right. So I think when you're saying, Martina, you're saying that when you read with her, you were saying right to left, but don't you go left to right?
So I read left to right. She puts the page from the right and brings it to the left.
Ah, got you. Okay. That's so funny that you say that, but you're going through the book from the left to the right.
Exactly. I'm reading left to right, but you flip the page right to left. And that's what right? Is flipping the page.
Okay. Awesome. I got you. That's what you said too. You said flipping the page. So I learned to read English, first and foremost, but also around the same age, 5 or 6, I also learned to read Hebrew. In Hebrew, you go through the book right to left and you flip the page left to right. Right. So I learned both ways kind of simultaneously, but there's a lot of times, because I read a lot of prayer books, and especially like the year of mourning I did for my father in 2018, and I went to a lot of prayer services, I really got in the habit of going in the book from the right to the left and flipping the pages left to right. And sometimes I'll pick up a book. Oftentimes I'll pick up a book and I'll pick it up from the right-hand side. I'll start in the back cover because it just feels natural to me. And that's because of how I was socialized. I was socialized from a very early age to read a book both ways.
Interesting. That's fascinating. So when you were first learning, did you have to make a switch, or did it feel supernatural both ways when you first were learning at age 5 or 6?
I mean, it happened so young that I can't ever remember having a hard time. It was just, it happened around, I feel like 4, 5, 6 years old is when I really start to have memories, and I don't have any memories that was challenging. Because I think probably even before I was 5, I probably sat on my parents' or my grandparents' laps in services and saw books being turned, the so-called other way or opposite way from, the way we read English books.
Interesting. And I wonder too, then like down the line, how does that affect your brain in terms of it being more flexible?
Well, Dr. Edwin Nichols, who we quote a lot around culture, he told me one time, he said, one of the reasons why, Jewish people, especially Jewish boys, because traditionally they were the ones that were doing most of the learning. So one of the reasons why, he said you all are recognized as being smart is because you have activated both sides of your brains more so than other people because of doing it that way. Now he would also say that, Asian languages, that the way you write in Asian languages, it's not either left to right or right to left, but it's a whole different way that activates the brain. And he used to do a whole thing on the way, like, one letter in Mandarin, how one letter in Mandarin had all of these different meanings, and you had to know all these meanings, and you had to be able to think in all these different directions. So I think that's another angle, that I know you both can relate to.
Yeah. Cindy, what's been your experience?
I grew up, Vietnamese was my first language. Although I knew how to speak it, I didn't really know how to read it, but they use, the American alphabet, and they'll just have certain accent marks in there. But for us, it's left to right as well, too. So yeah, it's very similar to, Western culture of left to right when you're reading.
That's really interesting. And have you noticed, like, was it something that you noticed with your kids when you were reading with them?
Now when I think about it, all my kids, they do flip right to left without us even teaching it to them. It's just something they picked up from habit of, okay, time to turn the page, right? And then they see how we turn the page, and then that's what they're doing. So yeah, now when I think about it, it is something that they just subconsciously like, oh, this is how you turn a page.
Yeah. Well, the other thing I thought about, because, right, my daughter's not reading, obviously, but she's looking at pictures. It also made me think about how we tell stories in such a chronological way in our Western ways, and how, at least with the pictures, now I'll try to tell her the story with the picture that starts at the end. And then, like, we create a story going forward. And, I don't think she understands what I'm saying, but it also kind of made me think about how we're so fixated on this chronological order of storytelling. Whereas, like, maybe we can start at the quote unquote end of the book and, like, tell the story moving backwards chronologically. So it's just some stuff I've been thinking about.
It is interesting.
And I think one of the things that's interesting to me is how we define normal, right? So it's like, well, this is the normal way because it's what we're used to, but normal is different everywhere you go. One time I was in like a multicultural class or DI class or something long time ago. And the instructor said, fold your arms, and so I ask both of you right now, fold your arms.
Okay.
All right. Now unfold them. Now fold them the other way.
Super hard.
Right?
Awkward.
Right?
I had to think.
Yeah. See, exactly. That's another example of groundwater. So if you're folding your arms, you don't even think about it. Like for me, the left one goes over the right one every time. Right.
Right.
So, but when I put the right one over the left one, it feels really odd and really different, and there's a lot of things like that in our lives that it's a great example of socialization and how we things become normative that could be done in many different ways.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I think let's get into the conversation. I'm excited to step back and listen to you all talk about emotional vulnerability and soul-focused parenting. And I mean, if you all are ready to go, I say let's go.
Let's do it.
All right, let's go.
It was Carl Jung, famous psychologist and psychiatrist, I think he was a student of Sigmund Freud, who once said, when asked by one of his students, what is an ego? He said, the ego is this. He said, the world will ask you who you are, and if you say to the world you don't know, then the world will proceed to tell you who you are. And who the world tells you that you are becomes your ego. Your ego is who you are trying to be for other people. At the Soul Focus Group, we spend a lot of time recognizing that for years we have been leading off by trying to please people, and we have to reduce the size of our ego to get back into our soul. There's so many beautiful lessons for us to learn from our ego. It's not a negative thing, it is a something to learn thing. At the Soul Focus Group, we learn how to reduce our ego, which translates to us reducing our performative behavior and really start showing up authentic.
Hey everybody, welcome back to this week's episode of Self-Focused Parenting. I'm your host, Cindy Edwards, and I am joined by my co-host, Martina.
Hey, Cindy.
Hi, Martina. It's been a while since we've had a chance to, hop on a podcast together. So I'm really excited to have you on today. So as mentioned earlier, today we'll be speaking about emotional vulnerability.
Yeah, this is such an important topic, and one I think I didn't give a whole lot of thought to before becoming a parent. So I'm super excited to learn from you.
Well, thank you. I'm excited to share what I know, and hopefully you'll be able to apply it, somewhere along the lines or down the line, as Makeba gets older. But I was doing a lot of thinking since listening to our last episode with Martin and Jay, and emotional vulnerability. I mean, when you talk about vulnerability, most times it does refer to, the emotional state, right? And I've thought about how that plays out in my day-to-day life with, the kids. I feel like in the beginning, my socialization with being a parent and being strong, I don't feel like I was as vulnerable as I would have liked to have been in the very beginning before I had time to really think about how important it is to be vulnerable with your children, because I always wanted to put on this like mom is strong sort of facade, I guess. I went through a lot, with postpartum depression after having, my third child, Kamaya. And there was a lot of days where I was really just like overwhelmed, and, I would just cry. And I remember, my middle child, Kamani, he was only like 18 months. He was still really little, like in diapers. And, he would have his tough moments. And he and I, like, we would kind of like go head to head sometimes, where like I'm trying to change his diaper. He has a poopy diaper, and, he just refuses to let me do it. And he's like kicking and screaming and crying. And I'm just in this, I was going through postpartum depression, and I was just like really overwhelmed. And I remember we were fighting each other, and I just started crying. I just started crying while I was trying to change his diaper, and he saw me cry. And then he just kind of stopped. I think it was like, it took him back a little bit, like, whoa, mommy's crying, And in that moment, I felt this connection with him, where once I stopped trying to fight with him and I just like kind of like surrendered and I cried, he just stopped. And then we gave each other a hug, and then he just lay there and let me change his diaper, But I think being vulnerable really helps build like a very deep connection with you and your child. I don't know if you've had moments like that with Makeba, or you being a first-time parent, where has emotional vulnerability showed up for you?
Yeah, first off, wow, Cindy, thank you for sharing. That is a really powerful story, and like bringing me almost to tears, just like feeling the struggle, both in empathy for you of what you went through and how challenging it is to be a parent, and joyful, but just a beautiful story. So thank you for sharing that. I think for me, it's really interesting you bring up kind of the struggle with the dirty diapers, because that's something we just started experiencing this week, like the fight. And it's been really interesting because it's the first time I've felt actually frustrated with Makeba, because it's like just kind of chaotic. Like, she's squirming everywhere. There's like poop, and it's just a messy situation. And kind of what you were talking about, it made me think about a couple things. Like, definitely when you talked about this desire to be strong, which I feel like for me has meant being almost emotionless, is what being strong is. So like not getting angry, not getting frustrated, and not showing that I'm like sad. And then also, how do we channel like frustration from being like maybe going to a place of anger with our kids to a place of that emotional vulnerability that you talk about. And so that's kind of something that I actually feel like is really perfect timing that we're talking about this, because it's kind of what I've been thinking about with Makeba. And how do I, in those moments of frustration, how do I show her like I'm also human, and I can't do it all, and I need some help, instead of turning to getting like frustrated and letting that frustration turn to anger towards her. I don't know if that makes sense.
No, that makes total sense. And I don't think there's like a way that you'll be able to communicate that for her to even, be able to understand that. But I think
Mm-hmm.
just seeing, babies are so intuitive, right? They like pick up on energy. So if they feel like you're upset or they feel like you're bothered, like, I feel like there's some sort of connection there. And it's just how you choose to like, I guess, show it, right? And so like some people may show their frustration through anger, and then,
Mm-hmm.
some people kind of channel it differently. But I don't know. That's a great thing to think about. But I feel like babies, they can kind of just pick up on that. Like I felt like when I was having that, that power struggle with Kamani during diaper changing time, like it was, he knew I was frustrated, but it was the
Mm-hmm.
way that I was showing my frustration. I was like, come on, Kamani, like we got to change your diaper. Like it was more of like, it was like a power struggle. Right. And so he was like, no, like, I don't want to do this. And I'm like, well, you need to do this. But then the minute I surrendered and threw in that towel and I like just started crying, it just changed the whole situation, the whole energy just shifted. So it's just kind of interesting to think about that, because I feel like he right there like felt like this connection to me, even though he was so little, right? Like 18
Yeah,
months. I don't
right.
know. It's very interesting. Energy is definitely strong, but I would love to hear your thoughts on what I just said.
Well, it just made me think about how we talk about in Soul Focus Group, our end goal is human solidarity, and that we relate with each other as humans. And
Mm.
like, how do we bring back that human relationship? And I think what you're describing to me is like you related to Kamani as a human, not as this person who's just a baby or a kid or a toddler. Like you related to him as a human, and that created this really beautiful human connection.
Yeah, definitely. And that's what they are, just little tiny humans with beautiful souls. You know, Now it's like different. Now my kids are a little bit older, right? They're 2, 4, and 6.
Mm-hmm.
So we're no longer on the topic of like dirty diapers anymore. It's like KJ is starting first grade. And I remember the other day, this is the first week of school. And the other day he was really, really nervous and really scared to go to school,
Mm-hmm.
for first grade. Cause I'm like, are you excited? And he's like, like kind of. And I'm like, well, what are your concerns? And he was like making friends. He's like, going into a new classroom and not knowing anybody. And, like, what if nobody wants to be my friend? That was like him being vulnerable to me. Cause, sometimes that's like, you're like, oh, you're going in the first grade. You should be excited. Like, what is there to be, scared about? But like,
Mm-hmm.
once you make that connection with them and you're like, oh, I totally understand how scary, going into a new classroom can be and meeting new people. But once you do make friends, like it's going to be amazing and you're going to love it and you're going to have so much fun. But it's just like realizing that, we all have like our own like day-to-day issues that we go through. And I feel like a lot of the times I try to like, whatever I'm bothered about or whatever issue I'm dealing with, like I always try to hide my frustration or my sadness or whatever from the kids, because I don't want it to affect them.
Yeah.
I think it's important to show them that like, hey, like life happens and there are going to be things that, knock us down or that we're going to be afraid of, or that we're going to be, there's people that are going to make us sad, or there's people that are going to, make fun of us or whatever. But whatever it is, like, I want you to be able to tell me. And when you tell me, I can relate with you because I've been there.
Yeah.
I think it just helps really build like this deep connection with your child and this trust. And they're like, oh, well, mommy's been through it. And, I feel like then they can come back to me and share whatever it is that they're going through, and know that like it's a safe space and that mommy's going to understand.
Mm.
You've probably heard of spiritual bypassing. The idea that you will focus on everything except social justice to get away from having to face social justice issues. But just like we have people that have spiritual bypass, there there are also people who social bypass. In other words, there are people who focus on social justice issues to get away from focusing on the things they need to do for themselves, the things they need to do to return themselves back to self-solidarity. So at the Soul Focus Group, we have come to integrate both spiritual and social consciousness into one. That's why we call ourselves Soul Focus, because when you integrate spiritual consciousness and social consciousness, the relationship you share with others, when you bring them together, when you integrate them, you create a consciousness we call Soul Focus. And we invite you to come join us at the Soul Focus Group and discover the power of integrated consciousness.
I'm curious because you said kind of initially with parenting, you were focused on being kind of strong, being like a strong mom, and that has changed, and now you're showing more emotional vulnerability. So I'm curious, like, what did that journey look like for you in making the change over your 3 kiddos, and kind of what prompted you to start making that change?
Yeah, that's a great question. To be honest, a lot of the times my kids, they always tell me, "Mommy, you're perfect." I'm like, "No, mommy's not perfect." I'm like, Perfection is not real."
Mm.
Like,
Mhm.
and they're like, "Well, you say that I'm perfect all the time." But I'm like, I'm saying that in like a different context. Like, I love everything about you. So everything that you are is perfect to me, however you are. But I explained to him that, like, mommy's not perfect. Mommy has bad days. Mommy makes mistakes. And I think it was just like them thinking I was perfect, and I don't want them. It's not that I don't want them to see me in that sort of light, but I want to create a realistic expectation in this house that, like, nobody has to seem perfect,
Mhm.
right? Like,
Yeah.
we're gonna go through what we go through, and there are days where mommy just, you know, I'll have my bad days, and when I do, if for some reason I accidentally, lose my cool, and I raise my voice or whatever, like, that's when I realize that, like, okay, I tell them, like, "Hey, I'm so sorry. Mommy's having a rough time right now, or mommy's just feeling really overstimulated, and I shouldn't have raised my voice." In that moment, they understand me when I say that. They don't get mad at me. And,
Mhm.
like, I think it's just that is what triggered me, or that's like what inspired me to just be vulnerable with them. Like, "Hey, I'm
Mhm.
not having a good time right now," or, "Hey, I'm dealing with something right now." And it's crazy. Just I'm thinking about it. I'm like, they're so young, but they get it.
Well,
You
it
know?
sounds like you're teaching them compassion. Like, these are things they're going to understand. Like, oh, I saw mommy had a hard day. So maybe even when a kid at school has a hard day, they'll be more understanding. That's kind of what I'm thinking or seeing.
Yeah, yeah, and just modeling that for them, that it's okay to have a bad day, or it's okay to have, a bad moment, right? And then just sharing that with each other, and then I feel like in that moment there's like a connection where you just understand. So that's what kind of inspired me. It's just like I just kept hearing it so much from them, and I'm just like,
Mhm.
no, like, I'm far from perfect. Mommy still makes a lot of mistakes, and just being transparent with them. And I think that's what helps build trust in our relationship, on both ends, where they feel like, it's okay to go what they're going through. It's okay to have a rough time. It's okay to not want to go to bed right now and feel sad about it, or it's okay to be scared, at night, and think that there's something in your closet. Mommy, at one point when I was little, I thought that there was monsters in my closet too. So I think it's
Mhm.
just a great way to just build connection with them by being vulnerable and letting them know that, like, mommy gets it.
Yeah, like you've been there.
Hmm.
So, Cindy, I'm super curious, kind of in the last few minutes that we have, of what advice do you have for me and other new parents, or parents who are new to being emotionally vulnerable with their kids, on kind of what is a good first step of how to start kind of creating that relationship that you're talking about that you have with your kids?
All I can really say is just I think being vulnerable is not easy, right? Like,
Hmm.
I don't think it's an easy thing for a lot of people, and especially to be vulnerable with your children. I think it's like a different, I guess, like a different caliber, right? Like, you can be vulnerable with your partner, and then your friends, and then you build this sense of trust with each other. And with children, I think it's just getting over that hurdle of like, okay, it's okay to show your emotions, to your children, and not scare them off or feel like mom or dad is weak, for having emotions. So I think it's just laying that foundation that like having emotions are normal, right? Like that's what makes us human. And then from there, it's like guiding them on how to share their emotions, or, like, hey, mommy's here for you, whatever it is you're going through, listening to them, and then sharing your empathy and compassion, like, I totally understand, and then sharing your experience, and then ending it on like a positive note as to like how you overcame that sort of emotion. So I think that's a good place to start.
I love that. And I think what I'm hearing you too say is apologizing to our kids when we do have those moments, which I don't know about you. I mean, we both come from Asian backgrounds, and that's not a super common cultural value of of elders apologizing to children, at least that I've seen.
No, not at all. I don't think, and I think this is just how my parents knew how to parent, or what they thought was best, but I don't think I've ever received any sort of, apologizing from my elders. It was always respect your elders.
Right.
Even if you think they're wrong, it's like they're always right. And if you don't agree with it, then just like be quiet and, keep your head down. And so, one of our podcasts, I was talking to Kelly, and I was like, I think it's really important to normalize apologizing to our kids. And so once they see us apologizing and making amends for like our mistakes, they're going to feel like it's normal to apologize when you make a mistake, instead of getting defensive and running away from that sort of conversation. Or, when they make a mistake, even now when I think about it, like when my kids fight, sometimes it's very hard for them to apologize to each other. Right. And I know they want to, but like in the moment, they're just like upset and kind of stubborn and don't want to do it. But eventually they come around to it. And that's something that I don't force on the children. I never be like, you need to apologize right now because what you did was wrong. Like I just explain to them, like, hey, you really hurt Kamaya when you shoved her, and it really hurt her feelings. And also like you hurt her physically. And when you explain the damage, or I guess like the repercussions of the situation, then it's in their hands, whether if they feel bad about it, then they'll go and they'll apologize. And sometimes it kind of takes my kids some time, but they come around to it. And then eventually they come up, like Kamani will come up and like, hey, Kamaya, I'm sorry for pushing you.
Oh, wow.
That's like 20 minutes later, but he still does it. And so, yeah, I think it's just trying to normalize apologizing and helping build that empathy and compassion for one another.
Well, that's a pearl I'm definitely going to take away, of not making your kid apologize, because I feel like that's something I've seen a lot of, is sort of, you need to go apologize now. But I like that your approach, and it's kind of like what we were saying at the beginning of the podcast, is kids will do what they see, even babies.
Exactly. Yeah.
So you're modeling it, so they are going to know that's going to be their quote unquote normal.
Yeah. From my experience, whenever I've tried to, back in the day when I've tried to be like, hey, you got to go apologize because what you did was wrong. They do it, but it's not genuine. They apologize because, you made them, not because they truly felt bad for it. So then when they came and did it, I felt like it wasn't receptive on the other end, because they felt that it wasn't genuine,
Right.
So I noticed that shifting away from that sort of way of handling that situation and just like letting them make that decision on their own, the connection is more genuine between, the two parties of which the situation happened with.
Yeah, I mean that makes complete sense. So that I really appreciate you sharing that wisdom with me and with our listeners. I'm going to try
Right.
to emulate you as we get to those stages of apologies.
Yeah, well, thank you. I'm glad that I'm able to share, my experiences and my wisdom. And, there's so much that I can learn from you as well. So just excited to be here and have you join me and pick my brain with parenting because it gets me to reflect on how I parent. So it's helpful for the both of us.
Yeah, and we need to meet up in person so I can see the parenting in action too.
I know. We'll definitely get something planned soon. But yeah, thanks so much for joining me today, Martina. And thank you to all of our listeners. And we hope you enjoyed this episode.
Thank you so much, Cindy.
Thanks, Martina. Bye-bye.
Bye.
There is nothing more powerful than communication because we all have to do it, and we're all doing it on some level all the time. When we are talking to ourselves or thinking, that's just another word for talking to ourselves, which means that we are doing what? Communicating with ourselves. When we are verbally speaking to other people, our body, or when our body language is demonstrating communication. Communication is so important because the world runs off of communication. So when you power up your communication, you essentially power up your life. At the Soul Focus Group, we invite everybody that comes to really delve into powering up their communication, transforming the way they listen, transforming the way they speak, transforming the way they connect to people, because that is where our power is. Power up your communication, people. We all need it.
Well, that was awesome. As I've told our listeners many times, I am very honored and blessed to be the engineer in these situations. So I got to listen to that conversation, and I really want to hear from you all, Martina and Cindy. How did you all feel about that conversation?
Well, like I said, I came away with a lot of pearls for my own journey in parenting. And something I was really reflecting on that Cindy talked about at the beginning is this feeling of what strong looks like and what a strong mom, what a strong woman looks like. And I think for me, I'm still early as a parent. Being strong has had to shift for me, and kind of I've had to be vulnerable in asking for help. And so for me, because my kid isn't talking quite yet, a lot of my emotional vulnerability right now has been with my family and with my partner and asking for help. And that I can still, kind of getting rid of this idea of a strong woman is a woman who doesn't need anyone else in her life.
I definitely feel you on that. I remember, when I first became a mom, it was hard for me to ask for help. I think I had this notion that when you ask for help, it makes you seem weak or, like you're not equipped to be a mom or you're not ready because you need all this help. But as, time went by, I realized that it takes a village to take care of just one child,
Oh my
right?
gosh.
Yeah. Right. So like childcare and even getting like the proper rest and sleep and shower.
Mm-hmm.
And so I definitely feel you on that. And I think as over time, having more children, I realized like I need so much help, right? Like I can't do this on my own, or I can, but it's going to be at the expense of my mental and physical health.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I think just being that, even feeling like you have to, or knowing that you have to ask for help, like feeling vulnerable of whatever it is that you're going through in the stages of being a mother or a first time mom. It's just like sharing with your family that like, hey, I need help. And that is like a big step of, being vulnerable. And I think when your family hears that, or your friends or whoever in your circle, they see that like you're struggling and you need the help, like they have this level of compassion and empathy for you, and then it makes them want to show up more.
Right. And then just like you were saying, it models community for our kids. And I feel like it's good for our kids to have multiple people as a part of their life as caregivers that they can look up to and learn from.
Definitely. And even if you think about it now, like well, for me, all my kids, they always ask me for help with everything. Even like the things that I feel like are so little, I'm like, you can do that on your own in my head. But like, I never tell them no when they ask me for help, because I just don't ever want them to feel like they can't ask for help from me or from anybody, that's like a caregiver.
Interesting. That's going to have to be a whole nother like topic we discuss, because that is also not, I've seen a lot of parents who say like, no, you can do that on your own, and try to teach that independence. So I am looking forward to picking your brain about that too, because that's kind of different than what I've seen. I don't know.
Yeah. I think, it can go both ways. There's definitely moments where you want to encourage them to do things on their own to build that level of independence. But yeah, I guess you kind of just got to read the situation. But yes, that's definitely another conversation for another day.
Yeah. I'm going to add one last thing. Just it made me think when you're responding was, but it's also trusting your kid to know that when they ask for help, they truly need help.
Yeah.
Trusting them to know themselves, which is something I always feel that we trust kids to know what they need, and what they're asking for is what they truly need.
Yeah. That's a great statement. Trusting your kid to know when they really do need help. Because sometimes, it may seem like, that they're trying to just be lazy or not want to do it so that you'll do it for them. But I think most times I always err on the side of like, okay, if they're asking me for help, they truly need the help. So
yeah, I really like that. Another one of the pearls I'll be taking away from our conversation today.
Well, I'm glad I can share my wisdom with you.
That's awesome. You all, it seems like you could just keep going on this conversation, and definitely opportunities to talk about it more. The one thing that I really wanted to say that stood out to me is the conversation about perfect, right? Mm-hmm. So I actually I believe that our children are born perfect. Mm-hmm. And, they're not born feeling like they're more or less than anybody else. They're perfect, equal to themselves, not to anybody else, right? Mm-hmm. But they come in unspoiled, perfect. And then by the time you get to be our age, it does really feel like perfection is not attainable anymore, right? Mm-hmm. But I think redefining perfect away from that kind of white cultural perfectionist way, but like you can be perfectly emotionally vulnerable. You can be perfectly equal to yourself. You can be perfectly in alignment with yourself. You can be perfectly true to yourself. But what most of us, interpret perfect is this almost like unattainable thing, but it's always in relationship to other people. Mm-hmm. Right. And so you all made me think a lot about the concept of perfect and how, there really is such a thing, but it's a soul thing, not a human thing. Right. It's like our souls are perfect and we're really having the perfect experience, but we define perfect as no problems. Right. That's where I think we define perfect as when things are perfect, there's nothing wrong. There's no problems. There's no struggles. But actually, I really think there is something called perfection that even we can attain. Mm-hmm. But it's when we approach things from a soul place and not an ego or, a comparison-based human place.
That's interesting. That's definitely going to be something that I'm going to reflect about, because I think my understanding or when I think of perfection is like you said, that like the perfect way of being, right? Like no problems, they got it, they can handle it. Everything is just going right in their life, or the way that they act is perfect. So yeah, now I'm definitely going to reflect about that, that perfection is attainable, because to me, in my eyes, I've always just felt like perfection isn't a real thing. It's not attainable. And that's been something that I've been kind of sharing with my kids. Not that it's not attainable, but I'm just like, there's no such thing as being perfect. That's what I tell them. Like, we're always going to keep making mistakes.
Yeah, I appreciate you.
I think, go ahead, Martina, go ahead.
I was going to say, I appreciate you adding that perspective. And it actually makes me think a lot about our conversation with Devin too, talking about perfection and self-forgiveness.
I was just going to say that it's like you're perfect exactly as you are, which is something that we do tell children sometimes, right? Mm-hmm. And what we're really saying is the you that existed before you were born, the you that came into this body, you are perfect exactly as you are. and you don't have to try to be anything other than who you are. And really, that's kind of how I've come to learn to see perfection, is just being equal to ourselves and not trying to be anything else relative to anyone else. And it doesn't mean, if somebody's born with one hand, they're perfect to themselves, right?
Mm-hmm.
And if they were born into a world where everybody had just one hand, and then somebody was born with two hands, the person that was born in two hands would be seen as being different and odd, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's just, I think that's something that I think we, that's deep in our groundwater, that perfection is unattainable in this life, but that's because we are always looking at perfect in relation to somebody else.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, awesome, you all. Well, thank you guys both for the amazing conversation, and sounds like it's something that can keep going. And it was really good to just hear the two of you talk. I really enjoyed it very much. So thank you both for sharing today.
Well, thank you for listening and being our engineer, Martin. And thank you to all of our listeners.
Yes, thank you. And thank you again for the conversation, Cindy.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for joining me.
So to all of our listeners, we say, be perfectly emotionally vulnerable whenever you can. And, thank you for coming on this journey with us. We love you. We care about you. We're so glad to have you a part of what we do. Please go to soulfocusedgroup.com. Check out everything that we do. If you're listening on YouTube or watching on YouTube, please hit like, subscribe, so we can continue to grow our community and share what we do with your friends and your family, and we'll grow the Soul Focused family. So with that, we ask you, as always, to stay safe, stay well, and most of all, stay soul focused.